So in the United States, screenwriters are not allowed to retain a copyright that's transferred to the studio or the producer.
Oh,
So they own the world. That's kind of what ends up happening, and it was frustrating. But I did absolutely fall in love with writing the novel once I could get past my imposter syndrome.
yeah.
I really did. I told a lot of people, I was like, I don't know. I mean, at 50, whatever, when I started writing it, I was like, I kind of feel like this is what I was supposed to be doing the entire time. I walked into my wife's office one day and was just obsessing about New York and missing New York. And I was like, whatever my life story is, the last line of it cannot be, and then he died in Texas.
Being an artist can be a heck of a ride, but you're not alone. On Journey of the Arts, we tell inspiring stories of artists and chat with those who support us on this path. I'm your host, Lola Opatayo, writer, editor, singer, and all-round lover of words. Come with me on the journey. Hi, and thanks for joining me again on Journey of the Arts, or welcome if this is your first time watching or listening to the show. In today's episode, we're time traveling. The year is 1998 and the place is Brooklyn, New York. We're wading through the murky waters of corruption in law enforcement and following a youngish investigator trying to solve a gruesome crime in the novel Brooklyn Motto. Brooklyn Motto follows Nicole Kelly, a carefree insurance investigator who witnesses and records a murder. When his boss turns up dead after he shares the recording with him, Nico plunges into the thrilling but dangerous community of Brooklyn to find the truth about these murders, himself, and those he calls friends. Brooklyn Motto is out now, and you can order a copy through the link in the description box or the show notes. Today's guest is Alex Johnson, author of Brooklyn Motto. Alex is a filmmaker and writer. His feature film, Two Step, premiered to critical acclaim at SXSW in 2014 and went on to become a New York Times Critics' Pick, as well as remaining 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. His screenplay, Northeast Kingdom, was selected for the 2016 Blacklist and was acquired by Paramount Pictures. In 2016, his screenplay, Any Rough Times Are Now Behind You, was selected by the Austin Film Society's Artist Intensive Lab, where he spent 3 days working one-on-one with late director Jonathan Demme. Prior to writing and directing, he was a seasoned NYC-based commercial and documentary producer. Alex's family hails from the Andes in Ecuador, and he lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm delighted to have you here. You are like I was telling you earlier on, you've worked across several artistic fields, and I'm curious to learn how you managed to do it all and publish your debut novel.
Well, I mean, if you're in the arts, you're kind of hustling.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
You go, I mean, I always wanted to do narrative film.
Yeah.
But my first job that I got, the best job I got at the time, was with a documentary company called Maisels Films, which is pretty famous in terms of the documentary world. And so documentary and commercials kind of became my day job.
Right.
And then I would be writing at night or on days off and always trying to get going. But it wasn't until I moved, we left Brooklyn in 2012 and went to Austin, Texas, and we were there for about 10 years.
Right.
And while I was there, I was able to get going in terms of actually making my own feature film on a small scale. But I joke that it did everything it was supposed to do. It got great reviews. The actors got great reviews. I got great reviews, and it almost, bankrupted us at the same time. So that's what it does. And then you're in the business.
Well, a win is a win.
Yeah, you take it. You go with the current. I've had that given to me as a working professional in the arts by many people. Versions of go with the current, deal the hand you're dealt, go with the flow. Part of screenwriting is being a working screenwriter sometimes actually mostly means you're being paid to write things that never get made.
Right. Right.
and it can be very frustrating. You can sell a script or work for hire, and if they don't decide to go on with the film in terms of production,
Mm-hmm.
you lose the world. You lose the
Wow.
characters. You just have to say goodbye to them. They're
Yeah.
not yours. The screenwriters do not retain their copyright, but 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 authors do. So in the United States, screenwriters are not allowed to retain a copyright that's transferred to the studio or the producer.
Oh.
So they own the world. That's kind of what ends up happening, and it was frustrating. And I had this. I was doing a job, one that didn't get made, for Sony. I was adapting Ernest Tidyman's novel Big Bucks, which is a heist novel, a true crime novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided I wanted Ernest Tidyman in the book. I wanted
Right.
him as a character in the film.
Right.
So I did a deep dive into Ernest Tidyman. Ernest, he passed away when he was only about 52, but he created Shaft, and he also created some other amazing characters. He wrote the screenplay for The French Connection, but
Yeah.
I just started getting obsessed with that idea of you know wanting my own type of Shaft, my own type of Columbo, an investigative character that uh, felt close to me as
Mm-hmm.
a mixed race Anglo and Latin guy. So I came up with this idea. I started to come up with the idea of kind of the insurance investigator, and I thought I was going to write it as a TV show, and then my process, like many writers, is I have a kind of note taking period, which is
Right.
all the garbage you don't want anyone to read. You make a deal with yourself that you're not going to erase it. You're just going to leave all the stupid stuff because they're going to
Yeah.
spark smart things, right?
Yeah.
So I started doing that, and I slipped into first person narration, which I don't do in screenplays, and I started to get really intrigued at the idea of doing that, and it would be distinctively different than how I write, you know, for screenplays.
Right.
And at the time, we were in Austin, and COVID was happening, and I was missing my family in New York. Didn't have any family in Austin. Just we had moved there for work,
Mm-hmm.
the old joke is that, but it's true. I walked into my wife's office one day and was just obsessing about New York and missing New York, and I was like, whatever my life story is, the last line of it cannot be, and then he died in Texas. So I was like, we gotta get back to New York. But
Yeah.
it wasn't that simple. We weren't going to just pack up. And I think that's when I threw myself into not just writing this story that takes place in New York, but I think part of it is also aging and going back to that kind of like period in your life, right? When you're not aware that you're individuating, you're not aware that
Right.
your frontal lobe is hardening and all that stuff. You just
Right.
think you just have that feeling in life where you have to go from passive to active.
Mm-hmm.
And so using the detective story for that really helped, and I was able to live in New York while I was writing it.
Amazing.
We ended up moving back 2.5 years after I made that joke, but we did move back. I'm very happy to be back here. But that's sort of that meandering thing. But then I'm
Yeah.
still, still do screenplay work. Like I told you before, I was talking to a director earlier about a potential gig, and still write my own stuff that I feel would work better in terms of screenplay. But I did absolutely fall in love with writing the novel once I could get past my imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I really did. I told a lot of people, I was like, I don't know. I mean, at 50, whatever, when I started writing it, I was like, I kind of feel like this is what I was supposed to be doing the entire time, and I wasn't doing it
Yeah.
because I was listening to the little voice in my head that was like, you can't write a novel. Um, so yeah, so that's the long meandering process and journey
Yeah.
of getting to Brooklyn Motto.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said you wanted to write it as a screenplay because while I was reading, I was like, this feels like I'm watching a movie. I need to ask Alex if he actually intended it for it to be a screenplay. So that totally checks out.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted it to be cinematic, and but I
Yeah.
think that and a lot of people have misconceived notions about screenwriting. I think that people don't think that screenplays sometimes are supposed to be engaging or captivating or descriptive, but they are. They
Mm,
need to be. It's just you're a little more less precious with words. You need to be fiercely economical, right?
yeah.
And so I feel like the past 10, 15 years, screenplays have actually become very literary. And so that's kind of the world I'm in. So
Yeah.
it wasn't too much of a shift.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, we're glad that you eventually wrote it. And I'm also like, I'm gonna we're going to talk about it a little further along about the process of actually writing the book. And I love what you said about overcoming imposter syndrome because this is your debut novel. And I
Mhm.
was like, surely he had to you know overcome several obstacles to be able to get this done after working as a screenplay writer for a long time. So I'm looking forward to getting to that part of the conversation. But before we get there, here's a reminder that you can watch the show on YouTube or listen to the show wherever you get your podcasts. All you have to do is look up Journey of the Art. And of course, if you love the show, please subscribe to the channel or follow Journey of the Art on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening from. This helps us stay connected so you're up to date with the latest content. Okay, so Alex, you told me how this came to be. And one of the things that, first of all, I also wanted to show it. I like to show the books, and I also want to say thank you for the notes. I was like, oh, he wrote me a note, so thank you for
Oh,
the
sure.
notes. Um, One of the things I love about your book is that it takes me back to a time that a lot of people nowadays secretly long for, a time without cell phones and invasive technology. And it was so refreshing to read a book that thrived on genuine human interactions. And also, I've never been to Brooklyn or New York, but I personally felt that you were able to effectively portray 1998 Brooklyn. And we feel the spirit of the community through the characters, the buildings, the transportation system, the food, the love, and even the crimes. Another thing that I really appreciate about it is the work that you've put in with all these themes that you touch on. Like there's several things that we could talk about when we think about this book, and it's almost as if you wanted to show us that the world hasn't changed that much. The issues that we're tackling in 2025, well, apart from AI, are the same issues that we see in 1998, and it's the same police corruption and brutality, fraud, capitalist greed, addiction, and family dysfunctionality. But on the flip side, it seems that you're also showing us that community is how we get through, right? So, again, I want to thank you for providing a fresh perspective. And I can't wait to get into my next question. So, my first question to you that would be around about the relationship that Nico has with his father.
Mhm.
And I couldn't help but notice how much his father slips into the frame throughout the book. I mean, he could be doing something random and he would just remember, oh, my dad would do things this way. And I found it odd that Nico never once reaches out to his mom, who is actually still alive, but he
Mhm.
wears his late father's presence throughout the book. And it is, in fact, through his father's teachings that he gains the skills to be a good investigator. And I don't see this father son relationship highlighted in books. I don't often see that. So I appreciate the perspective, and I was wondering if you'd like to share a bit more about it.
I mean, I think that you know, to contextualize my answer with another aspect of of the book is that Nico is mixed race.
Hmm.
So like, and I used to never want to put myself onto characters because I thought, oh, it's too easy, or
All right.
that's not writing or something like that. And then just hear writer after writer, exploring their own their own who they are. And as I get older and the people that can answer questions, there are less people that can answer questions I have.
Right.
Um, I'm looking to kind of like pursue who I am. And so part of that was setting Nico's cultural situation with an Anglo father and an Ecuadorian mother. I think why he's the father's more present. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
literally more, even though he's dead. It opens with, he's dead. He's dead. It's no
Yeah.
spoilers. Um, is that, there's just all the unresolved issues in terms of their relationship. His father was an addict
Yeah.
and a musician, and all the complications that come from that. And whenever Nico's trying to uh, say something positive about his father, he almost always needs to contextualize it in
Yeah.
some way. And then later he starts to get angry at himself for doing that.
Yeah.
I think that the ghosts that are, the folks that are gone, the ghosts sometimes are more present because we can't ask them a question.
Mm.
We have to, look at our past relationship with them. Um, in terms of his mother, there's some, the plan is to write some more books, and his mother is literally like one of the main characters of the next book. So
Oh, I
so
can't wait to meet her.
she'll be front and center. Um, but yeah, I think that's it. And just to be clear, Nico's father is like a New York City musician of mild success that always
Mm-hmm.
kind of like bumping against fame, but not quite breaking through.
Right.
My father was an FBI agent. It's not
Yeah.
like
When I saw
my
that, and your
father.
mom was a CIA analyst.
My mom was a CIA
So I
analyst.
was like, of
Yeah.
course you wrote a detective fiction novel.
Well, sometimes I think that that's how I try to live up to what my father wanted of me. We had two of his three children went into the entertainment industry. I think he wanted, I think he wanted us to be FBI agents, but we chose a different path. So
Yeah.
sometimes I think I'm trying to connect with him through doing it. I don't
Mm.
know, possibly, even though the characters are very different.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that there's something there. Like, I did really enjoy this book, and I'm not just saying that because um, I'm trying to be nice. I actually told my husband, I was like, "You're gonna love this one. Like, this is a book that because most of the books I read, he's just like, your books." But I was like, "This one, you're going to love it. Like, yeah, this is the kind of stuff that you will like." Um, so there's a wonderful intersection between films, music, and investigation in the novel. Nico's father is a somewhat successful musician, and Maggie makes a living. I'm going to say she makes a living selling forgotten music, well, old music, right? And it's almost as if you wanted to pay homage to artists whose works have been forgotten. Where did this idea come from, and why was it important to include this in the book?
I don't know. It's just that it's tied into sort of greater things in the book, but it's the
Mm,
idea that New York is like, there are seasons, but I don't know. It's not, there are eras, and there's
right,
just like, there are waves of artists and waves of writers and
right,
waves of talented people that come in and try and succeed or don't, and
right.
leave or stay. And that's really the energy that makes New York the most interesting place,
Mm,
I think, you know, on the East Coast. But
right.
so there's that. But I think like my father is from, my father and mother are both from New York, and and he used to tell a million jokes. He still tells a million jokes, but I would walk around the city, and if I heard him tell a joke, like the trash bag joke that I use in the book, it's one of
Yeah.
my dad's. He would always be like, "Oh, yay! It's the day the city delivered the trash."
Yeah.
So it's just, when you have an existence in an area, um, and you just go to those memories. But
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a little meandering, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I do appreciate what you said about different waves of artists, and it's so easy to forget people. And I think that artists give a piece of themselves, a piece of their hearts, to their work. And so it's almost like all these forgotten hearts that are
Mhm.
just abandoned in one place. So I really, really appreciated that. And I think it's because I'm an artist myself and I know the struggles of creating something and it's just forgotten.
Yeah.
So I wanted to highlight that. So closely related to this is the portrayal of middle-aged men whose dreams were never quite realized. And we see this in, the story of Nico's father, Mikey, the bartender, and Finch. Were you aware of this as you were writing? Like, did you see the pattern while you were writing? And what are some things that you wanted to show with this idea?
I don't think I was aware of it until this very moment. But it's really, I mean, it's the book is I think the book is a great story and it's got original blah stuff this, but it is an
Right.
investigation of me.
Hmm.
It in some ways, it is the most personal thing I've probably written. And when you're in the arts and you're aging,
Mm-hmm.
you can't help but think about lasting, about
Right.
existing beyond. I mean, in some ways, the book is me doing that in physical,
Right.
actual form. Because if I could work and have movies not get made, or even I don't know, there's something about holding something.
Yeah.
I would get asked. I would be told a lot. I would see people that I hadn't seen in a million years, like, it's amazing you're still doing film. You didn't give up. And it's kind of like, you know, some people don't give up,
Hmm.
and they're going to feel complete-ish, but they might not ever achieve their dream.
Right.
I think a lot of it is also coming from Nico's perspective of being, well, everything, because it's first person, is from his perspective, really, but even his interpretations, but about being at that age,
Yeah.
that age between, at the late 20s, when you need to start taking things a little more seriously. You
Right.
need to start thinking, is this what I want to do with my life?
Right.
Um, so, and then he's seeing people that maybe didn't succeed in those choices, or
Right.
so yeah, there's definitely something there. I'm gonna bring it up in therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something there, and I love what you just said about it being from Nico's perspective because yes, I mean, obviously, the book is written in the first person voice, but maybe it's also him like zooming out because at the beginning of the book, we see that he's carefree. He's like wondering, do I want to pursue this path? At some point, he actually does say to himself, I'm still too young. I'm going to do this later. But at the end of the book, without giving away too much, he comes to a decision whether or not that decision was planned. So I do think there is something interesting about these men, and the way that they respond to, I mean, Mikey, Nico tells us that Mikey's, zones out, probably thinking about his life, but he seems to have his act together in some way. Like he's sort of made his peace with things, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, by being hateful, by being a racist. um
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, there's just that's just a cult that's one of those guys that's just like, culturally, the bars that I remember uncles taking me to or whatever, there'd be some bartender and they'd be like, hey kid, let me get you a Coke, and then
Yeah.
say the absolute most horrifically racist thing you've ever
Yeah.
heard, and you're gobsmacked and you look around and nobody's acting like he said anything.
Yeah.
There's definitely that vibe in much of the world, but specifically in New York City,
Yeah.
people of a certain age.
Yeah, that is very interesting that you talked about that because that was actually going to be my next question. So earlier on, I mentioned that you are from, well, part of you is Ecuadorian,
Ecuadorian, yeah.
and the other part of you is Irish American. And so one of the things that you dwell on in the novel is racism. It's in the jokes and the serious conversations. And honestly, like you said, this aspect of the book was quite shocking to me because this is Brooklyn, a place that's remarkably diverse. Like you
Mm.
would expect a certain type of, acceptance in a place where everybody looks different. but there's such an explicit aversion to people of other races, especially as seen by, you know, people of a certain race and age. And so, as I was reading this, I was wondering, how are you able to explore this theme while considering your own experiences as a person of mixed heritage? I mean, you did just share that
Mm.
probably some of these experiences in the book came from your own experience, but I wonder if while you were writing, you were able to come to terms with some of the things that happened in your life, or this was your way of unpacking things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I typically a lot of some of the dialogue in terms of like description, like people don't assume Nico is mixed race; they just assume
Right.
he's white or Jewish or you know. Um, and that's basically been my existence in New York. So much so that you occasionally get the racist statement said to your face, or just casually, like
Right.
with a nudge, and you're just like, I mean, I've had family members, on the Irish side, say repeated things that, you to remind them that I am half of my mother and half of my father. And even then, there's kind of the like, yeah, but I mean,
But
you
yeah,
know, but I'm not afraid when I look at you or something like that,
yeah,
so, but it's such a part of New York. Um, Definitely it was a part, it was we just, like I said, we moved back, and without going, my son was, I think my son was born here, and then we moved to Austin,
hmm,
and then we moved back, and he's in high school now. But when we moved back and he was in middle school, he was like shocked at things that he overheard. And because I think he thought, coming from Texas,
yeah, yeah. I
that
mean, it's the
New
same way I
York is going
felt.
to be
Yeah,
this mecca of, but it's not. It's you certainly do have uh, situations and people, and I don't want to generalize and say neighborhoods, but that's not
yeah,
really the case. But that of course, we have good people in New
yeah,
York, I promise you.
absolutely.
But more people tend to respond to that comment that Mikey goes off about, because that he's annoyed that he has to walk extra blocks
Yeah,
to get to his to get beer.
yeah,
Because I mean, I remember in the 90s, some of the bodegas would go halal, and get rid of cigarettes and
yeah,
booze and stuff. And at first it was like, I remember just being like, huh, okay, all right, I got to walk an extra block or whatever.
yeah,
But some people got really pissed off. They'd be like, you can't change this.
yeah,
It's my bodega. And it's like,
yeah,
no, it's their bodega. They can do what they want. But yeah, I think it's also some generational racism is definitely layered into the experiences in the book.
yeah.
um, which, you know growing up, I would always be told to give people slack for that.
Hmm.
But I'm talking about giving relations
Yeah,
slack for that. So yeah.
yeah. It's very. I mean, it's very interesting what you said about it being of that racism coming from a certain age group. But Frankie, who is considerably younger, I think, than Mikey, also has, some racist tendencies. So as much as I'm willing to agree that it's, maybe it's a generational thing, there's a part of me that also wonders if
Yeah.
there's just something in the society that isn't generally accepting of people from other places. I mean, Mikey says something about, these people have come to do this and do that. So
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, it's not. I mean, is it Frankie, or is it Tommy? I think, is it, which one? Who's the character that you're talking about? The person that leaves the phone message about the.
that's Tommy. But Frankie also like gives some racist slurs when he's talking about the people that he beats up.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but there's also that too. Like I, without, my Ecuadorian family is mostly light skinned, and I've heard I've heard insane things out of their mouths as well.
Yeah.
It's just this kind of like, coming, certain people coming from a different perspective. But I mean, it's all a mess.
Yeah.
And it's just I just wanted I don't want to make it sound like it's like a Tarantino movie or something like that in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like playing with race,
Mm-hmm.
or like saying things just to upset people.
Mm-hmm.
I think everything in the book casually has been said in my presence,
Well,
probably repeatedly. So um, yeah.
yeah. Well, it was shocking for me because, like as I said, New York, it's a lot of people from different places. Well, maybe we will mildly cross our fingers and hope that it changes in the future. Because if we have people like Nico, who's younger, and um, actually, I think the only other person who is young in the book that doesn't who's not racist is Maggie. So
Yes.
maybe there's some hope for the future.
Maybe there's some hope.
Maybe there's
Yeah.
some hope. So let's talk about the relationship between Cookie and Kate and Nico's father and mother as we explore this idea of secrets between lovers,
Hmm.
specifically as it pertains to drugs and addiction. And in the book, I see that you've created a beautiful contrast. On the one hand, with Nico's parents, we see that there's no trust. Like Nico's mom has learned where to look for her husband's stash. And on the other hand is the relationship between Cookie and Katie, where there's a refusal to accept reality. And even when the facts are telling, it takes a long time for Cookie to accept that perhaps her girlfriend is not the person that she knew. What was going through your mind as you set up this contrast? First of all, were you aware of it?
I was aware of that one.
Okay. I'm just pulling strange stuff out of the air.
No,
Okay.
no, it's lovely to hear any sort of like more than a lingering thought about the novel. I'm honored to think that um, it's an honor to know that you thought about things and were able to pull things out of it. That's beyond what I could ever have wished.
Oh,
Um,
glad to hear that.
but I mean, I play with it a little bit. The idea that you can never really know anybody. But I mean, part of it is that Nico's trying to wrap his head around his parents' relationship.
Hmm.
He can't ask his father the questions that he would want to ask. Um, he's mildly estranged from his mother, which we'll get into in the next book, and that he's guessing a lot in terms of how they must have, what their dynamic must have been between an addict and a spouse, and but he also saw a lot of how his mother, and most of his memory, I think all of his memories of his mom and father are aggressive,
Right.
or his mother being angry or aggressive, or his father letting everyone down. And then with Cookie and Katie, Kate, I wanted there to be, I don't know, I've been married for a long time, but there are those moments when you're intimate with someone at the beginning, where you're so trusting, and you know as much of them as they've been willing to show you, and you it takes a while to push through that.
Right.
So I just was intrigued at the idea of, like, Cookie falling so hard, and being so trusting,
Hmm.
and not being able to accept that, which I honestly might have been the beginning of him and his parents' relationship.
Right.
The part of their relationship he didn't see when
Right.
they were in love and trusting, and it was complicated before all the drug stuff came to a head.
Right. Right. I mean, I thought that was so nicely done. And I almost I mean, after a while, I was like, okay, Nico is just making stuff up. Cookie is right. Katie can be this person. And I was actually disappointed when, Nico finally comes and tells her this is what, the situation is. Even though, I mean, I don't want to give stuff away, but even though Nico does have to do something
Yeah.
to help Cookie feel better, but it was very, it was I mean, it was something that caused me to pause and really ask, do we really know the people in our lives, and what we find if we look closely? So,
Yeah. And I think that, and then do we really know them? And then when they're gone, how, do we mythologize them? Do we
yeah.
do we investigate?
Yeah.
our past with them, or do we just hold on to a very basic image, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I want to talk about a seemingly random detail in the book, the dollar vans. The unlicensed commercial vehicles that bridge the transportation gaps in the outer borough. So Nico tells us that the Transportation Commission looks the other way in order for this system to thrive. And in a way, it reminds me of several, shall we call them, in betweens, where something is not legal or morally acceptable, but because it serves a purpose, it gets overlooked. It's kind of like Wally's role in the mayor's office as a liaison of sorts who handles the PR around bad cops. Can you speak a little bit more about the role of these in betweens in communities like Brooklyn?
Um, the dollar bands I just wanted to have in, because they're so, I don't know, they're such a part of the community. They're one of these things, like the amount of white friends that have come up
Mm.
to me have been like that lived in New York since 1990, and they're like, I never, what dollar bands? What are you talking about? And I'm just like, go to Queens, go to like the Lower East Side, go to Brooklyn. They're
Yeah.
go to Bushwick. Well, now it's probably not. It's too hip now, but um, but yeah, they were. It's just a very colorful element, but it's also. And if you've ever been inside a dollar van, it's like a bus. It's a community. It's almost like you see your neighbors and
Mm.
hey, how you doing? And
Mm.
people just get off and get in and but it is, there are these things in the city. There are these, things that, some things are illegal, but it's okay. And some
Yeah.
things are illegal and it's not okay.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, what was the one you paired it with?
With the Wally's role in the mayor's
Oh
office.
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
like even the relationship that Nico has with Frankie. Like they cross many blurred lines, right? So like there are several, well, maybe three of them now that I can think of, elements like that in the book where lines are being crossed, but then they serve a purpose. So we're not like really. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, but I think that's also just like that's part of the bigger machine that will be discussed, gets discussed in the kind of towards the
Yeah.
end of the book. The kind of political machine and everything is just that it's New York, and it's like
Yeah.
you exist in between the lines sometimes.
Yeah.
With Wally, it's just I've just if you were in New York, and I'm sure it's happening now still, but my experience of being like younger in the 90s, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody knew somebody that got shoved around and
Right.
maybe got some cash to cover it up, or
Right.
you know there was also just all the framing they used to do. They'd leave bikes out in Tompkins Park, and
Mm.
if you touched it, you were stealing
Wow.
the bike, and they would get you. And it was just a really weird, that whole Giuliani era was a weird time to be in, a younger person in New York. I was, and again, like I'm not easily recognizable as a person of color. And so I, wasn't harassed like other
Mm-hmm.
people at all. But, but yeah, it was the era of, um, stop and frisk.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of knows it's illegal.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty illegal. But then they're just like, oh, but look at all the bad people
Yeah.
we grabbed, and all that stuff. It's the same if you grabbed random people, you would a percentage of them would have things on them, like.
Yeah.
But it was just looking the other way for the betterment
Yeah.
of where New York City was headed at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this element that we're talking about really lends itself to the honesty that's in the book. Like this isn't a romanticized version of Brooklyn. Like it's honest. And again, there is no judgment on Nico's part. At the end of the book, we see that look, sometimes as painful as it is what it is, and you just have to make it work somehow. So, I wanted to point that out. So there is a great spotlight that you shine on not profits and the real estate industry and how these are connected to the high cost of accommodation and living in Brooklyn and these areas that are getting gentrified. I mean, I live in Surrey where a lot of places are going through the same things, and people are not able to access the kinds of houses that they want to access because it's so expensive. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so the organization that is discussed in the book, it's a fictional version of what was a real organization in the 90s. So, you know, New York City, the outer boroughs, and I'm sure the city itself at some point, but the outer boroughs used to have factories, and
Hmm.
they would have communities around those factories. Um, and I referenced the Ronzoni factory in Astoria, which is a pasta company, and that was there for so long. And then people that lived there, people would grow up. Some people would grow up and be like, "I'm going to go work at the Ronzoni factory, like
Hmm.
my dad, or whatever." But what started to happen is that, and it was kind of at the same time as NAFTA and things like that, as business was being pulled out of New York, people started renting, and they've always done this, but it became very fashionable in Brooklyn, especially Williamsburg, to rent commercial loft spaces to artists and things like that. There's always the
Hmm.
first wave of artists moved into these neighborhoods, but so what would end up happening is, the it's they've got all these studies that basically, like, if you illegally rent commercial space to residents, it has this effect on raising the rent of everyone,
Right.
and eventually the community that lived in that neighborhood can't live in that neighborhood anymore, and they're traveling distances to
Right.
go work at that factory, and then eventually the factory leaves.
Right.
Anyways, and it just becomes a, like the Domino Sugar Factory is
Hmm.
on Williamsburg waterfront, is does a lot of wonderful art
Hmm.
exhibits and stuff, but it's mostly commercial. And when it used to employ, I don't know how many people that lived in that community, that can't afford to live in that community anymore. So it's sort of like there's that tie. So that they're literally, this group literally would send young people out looking for illegally occupied lofts,
Hmm.
and they would collect evidence and then go to the city and have the landlords would receive a fine. And
Right.
it was trying to dissuade the landlords from doing it, but it was just too profitable,
Hmm.
and now we have the Brooklyn that has, I don't think there's a Prada store, but there are stores like Prada in Williamsburg, these crazy, rich
Yeah.
vacation people on vacation stores, where
Right.
nobody can live there. But it's like, and then the community dies and it changes and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And part of what I get into is that New York is always doing that.
Yeah.
It's just always eating itself
Yeah.
and then turning into a new city, and everybody's angry about something being gone,
Yeah.
be it a job or affordable housing or a bagel place that they used to love,
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I don't know if
Yeah.
that got
Yeah, that
there.
helps. I mean, I wanted to point that out because, as I said at the beginning, one of the things that I love about the book is that it shows us that the problems that we're dealing with right now are the same problems that, we're dealing with back then. So the problems still exist. And I think it's a fundamental uh, consequence of capitalism because
Hmm.
everybody is trying to get the best for themselves, and it's less about what is best for the community but how much money can I make. So as it was then, so it is now.
Yeah.
um, so as we round up, Alex, I want to ask, are there any learnings that you're willing to share about your experience writing this book?
um Nostalgia, I no, I'll take that one back. um I was gonna say it's a slippery slope, but yeah, I think I edited myself okay. The original draft was a little leaning back and celebrating the past a little too much, maybe. But no, I mean, it's like personal lessons from the book. Like, for me as a writer, I'm in a constant, like I mentioned before, I'm just always in a struggle with imposter syndrome. I mean, I started in documentary, produced documentaries, got into fictional, narrative feature film, and I have what you would consider a working career, which is not easy to
Right.
to do as a writer. But it's incredible how it gets in your head.
Yeah.
Like every time I would get a blurb back, I would be like, okay, that'll hold me on for another hour. I'll feel good about myself for an hour, and then I'll get my next blurb. But I think just and certainly the positive reaction to the book is in my middle age, I think I've learned to trust my instincts
Yeah.
in terms of my writing a little more.
Yeah. That's amazing. I really, I really love that you are honest enough to tell us that you still suffer, from imposter syndrome. Because, I mean, I think when you start out being an artist, you know that you have imposter syndrome, but somewhere in your mind you feel like I will overcome this, like this will
Mhm.
be a thing of the past. But the more you go on the journey, the more you realize that this is something that you're actually going to be dealing with, almost throughout your life, and you just have to accept it for what it is, see it coming, and just push through. So I'm
Yeah,
really thankful that you shared that.
it'll come back tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, somebody will leave a nasty review and you'd be like, oh, I was right, I'm not that great. And
Oh,
then
it's
someone will share a good review and you'd be like, oh, okay, maybe I was wrong.
yeah. I mean, it's just there's so much weight attributed to the concept of prose of a novel, and it's communicating and it's writing, and I feel like if anyone that does any writing in their daily life um, has a novel in them.
Mm,
Like it's just doing it. Like lawyers that
mm,
write briefs, you know, anybody that does anything where they're expressing themselves with words, and
right.
they're intimidated about writing a novel. They shouldn't be, because they're already doing it. They just need to
Mm.
hone it a little bit and focus. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to end it. I never thought about it that way, but thank you for sharing that. And thank you for coming to chat with me today. I've had a great conversation and learned so much. I mean, I have to tell you that I appreciate how much history that you've brought into this book. I forgot to mention that earlier on. It's clear that you not only pulled from your experience, but you also did research, to make sure that things were accurate. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for all the energy you've put towards reading and thinking about the book. I'm honored.
Oh, you're very welcome. On the next episode, I'll be chatting with another inspiring artist. But before then, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you think about this show and this episode. Feel free to drop me a note here or send me a DM on Instagram at Journey of the Art Pod. Finally, please subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or follow and rate the show if you're listening elsewhere. Help me connect with other artists who need a dose of inspiration today. Until next time, stay on the journey of your art.